The afternoon sun cast a gentle glow over the golden dome of the Fairmont San Francisco as Aria Bennett stepped out of the taxi. Her navy dress hugged her frame just right, elegant, confident, but not screaming for attention. When she tried it on at the boutique, it made her feel powerful. But now, standing at the entrance of her cousin's wedding, it felt more like a spotlight on her solitude. Aria took a steadying breath before entering. The moment the ballroom doors opened, conversations paused mid-sentence. Eyes turned toward her. A few polite nods greeted her arrival, but most faces simply stared, confirming what they suspected: she really came alone. From a table near the entrance, she spotted her mother Janet seated beside her husband Douglas. Janet's smile was soft, but Aria recognized the pity in it all too well. It was the same look she'd received countless times, as if her singlehood was a tragic flaw rather than a life choice. Nearby, her sister Lauren leaned toward her husband and whispered something that made them both chuckle quietly. Aria didn't catch the words, but she didn't need to. Lauren had always had a talent for minimizing her in ways that looked graceful on the surface, but cut deep underneath. The ballroom was stunning. White orchids lined the tables, chandeliers glittered, and glasses of champagne sparkled like crystal stars. The wedding of Samantha, her childhood partner in crime, was in full swing. They had once built pillow forts and chased fireflies during summers at the family's cabin near Mount Rainier. But adulthood had taken them down different paths, Samantha to fashion in LA area, to marketing in Seattle. She couldn't even find a date, someone whispered behind her, followed by a stifled laugh. Aria didn't turn around. Instead, she made her way toward a quiet corner, praying to disappear into the walls. But no matter how fast she walked, the heat of silent judgment clung to her like static. A sharply dressed attendant appeared. "Ms. Bennett, right this way, table 17. She followed without question. Table 17, otherwise known as the singles table, sat near the back exit. Seated around it were a sweet elderly woman with a whistling hearing aid, a teenage cousin glued to his Nintendo Switch, and a recently divorced uncle reeking of whiskey. "Your mom tells me you're very busy with work," the elderly woman shouted cheerfully. "Is that why you haven't found a husband yet?" Aria nearly spilled her water as she reached for it. "I enjoy my career," she replied, forcing a polite smile. But inside she was unraveling just a little. She was used to comparisons, used to being treated like something was missing. But being used to something didn't mean it hurt any less. As the string quartet played softly and chatter echoed throughout the elegant room, Aria sat alone. But she wasn't weak. She knew this night would be hard. Still, she came. Because sometimes simply showing up even when you're alone is an act of quiet bravery. As Aria sat quietly in the corner of the ballroom, the glittering lights from the chandeliers above seemed to illuminate a part of her past she rarely allowed herself to revisit. A childhood not lacking in material comfort, but perpetually short on recognition. From an early age, she noticed the difference in how her parents treated her and her sister Lauren. Lauren was the ideal daughter, beautiful, poised, and effortlessly charming. She was always the lead in school plays, the favorite of teachers, and the one who drew admiration with what seemed like minimal effort. Aria was different, quiet, thoughtful, drawn more to books than attention. She didn't know how to smile at the right moments or fill a room with effortless charm. But she was smart. She loved learning and discovered early on a passion for marketing, a field her parents, especially her mother, never quite understood. "Couldn't you consider something more practical law?" maybe her mother had asked when Aria declared her major at the University of Washington. While Lauren was taken dress shopping and received patient driving lessons from their dad, Aria figured things out on her own. She enrolled in advanced classes, wrote her own scholarship essays, and spent summers interning at small startups doing everything from designing logos to writing brand strategies. When Aria landed a coveted job at a prominent tech firm in Seattle, the news was mentioned briefly at a Sunday dinner while the TV played in the background. But when Lauren got engaged to Derek Vaughn, the son of their father's golf buddy, the family threw a week-long celebration. Her mother cried happy tears. Her father personally wrote out wedding invitations in cursive. Aria told herself she wasn't jealous. She understood they had chosen different paths. But every time someone asked, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" something in her shrank. It wasn't just a comparison, it was a statement about worth. To her family, Lauren was the benchmark. Aria was the deviation. She remembered the one time her mother took her to a salon before a high school banquet. As the stylist curled Aria's hair, her mother glanced at her in the mirror and said softly, "You don't need to stand out too much, honey. Just neat is fine." Aria had smiled then, but inside something fractured. Those memories never truly faded. They just lay dormant until a moment like this, a look from across the room, a seat at a singles table brought them back with startling clarity. Some wounds don't bleed, but they still break you. For Aria, the deepest cut didn't come from screaming fights or shattered plates. It came from a calm confession: I didn't mean for it to happen. It just happened. That was how Adam, her boyfriend of 3 years, explained the affair with a coworker. As if betrayal was some accidental slip, like spilling coffee, not shattering trust. Aria didn't cry. Not then. She sat silent as he grabbed his coat from the rack they once picked out together and walked out of the apartment they'd spent months making a home. What hurt her most wasn't the affair. It was how completely blind she'd been to it. She, who could read marketing data like a second language, who understood emotional trends and consumer behavior, had missed all the signs unraveling right beside her. The months that followed became mechanical. She woke up early, went to work, stayed late, came home to a laptop instead of a partner. Friends invited her out, she declined. Co-workers offered to set her up. She smiled and politely passed. Love in her mind had become an investment with impossible risk and questionable return. Marketing became her safe zone. It was measurable, trackable, something she could improve control. She couldn't control the heart of another person, but she could manage Q4 strategy, optimize user engagement, and crush deadlines. It was during this time that she was promoted to senior marketing director. The moment she got the confirmation email, she slipped quietly into the restroom and let a few tears fall, not of joy, but of quiet validation. After months of being invisible in a dying relationship, someone had finally seen her. When the wedding invitation from Samantha arrived with a Pluzzy 1 typed neatly under her name, Aria set it aside for a week. She considered bringing a coworker. Olivia half joked about hiring an escort. Just for appearances, no one would know. But Aria folded the card and tucked it away. She wasn't going to keep performing for the comfort of others. She wasn't going to create a fiction just to avoid raised eyebrows or pitying glances. She would go alone, not to prove a point, not to rebel, just because it was honest, because it was her. The day she shopped for a dress, she stood alone in front of a boutique mirror in Belltown. The sales associate asked, "Big event coming up. Will someone be joining you?" Aria smiled softly and replied, "No. It's just me." But that smile wasn't one of resignation. It was quiet certainty. Her solitude wasn't a wound to be hidden. It was a choice born from knowing what she truly deserved. Under the soft golden light of the chandeliers and the delicate notes of the string quartet, the ballroom at the Fairmont San Francisco shimmered with elegance. But for Aria, every step she took across that polished floor felt like walking on shattered glass. Every greeting, every glance was a mirror reflecting her intentional solitude. She wasn't wearing anything particularly loud. Her makeup was subtle, but somehow her arrival alone still managed to stand out as if she were a flaw in the carefully curated perfection of the event. "Is that Janet's daughter, Aria, still flying solo?" A distant aunt chuckled, Prosecco in hand. "Must be busy, poor thing," an older uncle added, just loud enough for others to hear. When Samantha, the glowing bride, entered the room, the energy shifted. Aria smiled, genuinely happy for her cousin, despite the cloud of judgment hanging around her like fog. But even that warmth was quickly eclipsed. "Table 17, a voice called out. Aria followed the event staff, her heels clicking against the marble floor, only to find herself placed at the table near the kitchen, clearly the no +1 table. Surrounding her were a sweet elderly woman adjusting a whistling hearing aid, a teenage cousin absorbed in his Nintendo Switch, and a distant uncle whose cologne had lost the battle to whiskey. She offered polite smiles, nodding gently, but the isolation sank in. Laughter erupted from the next table. Aria turned her head to see Lauren, her sister, animatedly telling a story surrounded by admiring relatives. Their eyes met for a second. Lauren lifted her champagne flute in a mock toast gesture, supportive on the surface, but Aria could read the subtext. "You know your place here, don't you?" She turned away, closing her eyes briefly, willing her composure to hold. She had practiced for this: tight smiles, vague answers, graceful retreats. Family events had become a series of survival tactics. "Aria, are you seeing anyone these days?" asked Aunt Linda, scooping up a shrimp cocktail. "Don't let your biological clock sneak up on you." "Doug's golf buddy's son is newly divorced," someone chimed in. "Owns 3 car dealerships." Aria laughed politely, offered a non-committal reply, and quietly slipped away into the restroom. She locked the stall and stood still for a moment. Cool water at the sink helped wash away the sting of words disguised as concern. She looked at her reflection, not a sad, broken woman as they seemed to see her. She was Aria Bennett. She had pitched campaigns to Fortune 500 clients, had revived product sales with a single ad concept, had survived betrayal and rebuilt herself piece by piece. And tonight she stood here alone, yes, but grounded. The pain wasn't from being single. It was from being seen as less because of it, especially by the people who were supposed to love her the most. Just as Aria was silently plotting her escape from the barrage of side comments and stares, the DJ's voice boomed across the speakers. "It's bouquet toss time. All the single ladies head to the dance floor." A few of her younger cousins squealed and rushed toward the center. Aria was content to stay in her seat and waited out until 3 aunts and even her own mother suddenly nudged her forward. "Come on, Aria." Aunt Victoria grinned. "Maybe tonight's your lucky break." She stepped reluctantly into the crowd, surrounded by giggles and eager glances. Samantha stood elevated with the bouquet, ready to toss it over her shoulder. But just as she raised her arms, the grand ballroom doors flew open. All heads turned. A man entered. Tall, confident, dressed in a charcoal gray tailored suit. His dark hair was neatly styled, but not overly perfect. He walked into the room like he owned it, not with arrogance, but ease, as if he belonged. "Wait, is that Sebastian Reed?" someone whispered. "The tech billionaire, the guy behind Reed Innovations." Aria's breath caught. Then he looked directly at her and smiled. Not the kind of polite smile you give a stranger, but the kind you give someone you know intimately. Then he began walking toward her. Each step was calm, assured. The crowd instinctively parted. Aria's heart pounded. When he reached her, the details became real, sharp, gray-blue eyes, a defined jawline, a warmth in his gaze that made her dizzy. "Sorry I'm late, love." "Traffic was a nightmare," he said smoothly, loud enough for surrounding guests to hear. Then he kissed her cheek. She froze. "Just go with it," he whispered in her ear. "You looked like you needed rescuing." "I'll explain later." Her instincts screamed to question everything, but something in his voice, calm grounded, made her nod. "I thought you weren't going to make it," she said, surprising herself with how steady she sounded. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." He smiled and slipped an arm around her waist with a protective ease that felt alarmingly natural. The room's energy shifted instantly. Samantha approached, eyebrows raised in delighted curiosity. "Aria, you didn't mention bringing someone impressive. Sebastian Reed." He extended a hand. "Apologies for the delay. An overseas call ran long." "Of course, any friend of Aria's is welcome," Samantha signaled to the event planner. "We'll need to update the seating. VIP section, please." Within minutes, Aria was whisked away from the dreaded singles table and seated near the bridal party. Sebastian's hand lingered at the small of her back as they moved through the crowd, steadying her, anchoring her. Lauren showed up not long after. This time her smile had cracks. "You never mentioned you were dating someone," she said lightly, though her tone strained. "You never asked," Aria replied. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't have to pretend to be composed. She simply was. As Aria took her seat at the new table now, just a few feet from the bride and groom, she barely recognized the shift that had taken place. Just 15 minutes earlier, she had been tucked away near the exit, invisible. Now she was in the spotlight. The glances around her had shifted from passive dismissal to curious admiration. Guests who had avoided eye contact earlier now strolled by, offering smiles and conversation starters. Lauren reappeared this time with an overly friendly expression. "So Sebastian," she purred, blinking a little too often. "What line of work are you in?" "Tech," he answered smoothly. "Oh, how interesting," she said. "My husband's been looking to diversify his portfolio. Any suggestions?" Sebastian didn't flinch. He offered polished responses, market trends, data privacy insights, consumer software shifts, all while effortlessly dodging any question that hinted at his personal life. Aria watched him handle her family with the kind of effortless grace that had always eluded her in these settings. When Lauren drifted away, Janet, Aria's mother, swooped in almost immediately, beaming. "Aria has always been the intellectual in the family," she told Sebastian brightly, as if she'd said it 100 times before. "Top of her class, wasn't that right, honey?" Aria nodded, biting back the urge to ask since when that had become something worth boasting about. For years, her achievements had been greeted with mild nods and redirected conversations. And now, with a man like Sebastian at her side, suddenly she was worth praising. Sebastian leaned toward her. "We should probably get our story straight," he murmured. "How long have we been dating?" 3 months, Aria whispered back. "Not too new, not too serious. Safe middle ground." "And we met at the Wilson Charity Gala in March. First date? Dinner at Zuni Cafe." He smiled, amused. "You're very good at this." Aria smiled back, but a quiet unease crept in. Was she playing the role well, or was she starting to enjoy it too much? Dinner progressed smoothly. Sebastian led the conversations with charm, never stealing the spotlight. During the toast, he gently tapped his glass to hers, holding her gaze with a warmth that made her feel, perhaps for the first time that night, genuinely seen. She knew it was pretend, a clever little play to shield her from pity. But the danger wasn't in being hurt. The danger was that she might start to wish it were real. Because when was the last time someone looked at her like that, with softness, curiosity, and full attention? She told herself it was acting. But if it was all scripted, why did it feel so real? The celebration carried on with clinking glasses and glowing toasts. Aria sat beside Sebastian, feeling an odd ease between them, as if the performance they began less than an hour ago had slowly become second nature. Under the golden lights and soft melodies, each glance from Sebastian made her feel like she truly belonged for once, not the afterthought, not the outsider. But peace has a short life in rooms full of history. From her right, Lauren reappeared, still wearing the same cordial smile, but this time it had a sharpened edge. She held her wine glass loosely, her gaze fixed on Sebastian with pointed interest. "There's something awfully convenient about this, don't you think, Aria?" she said sweetly. Aria turned calmly. "What do you mean?" "Oh, I just find it." Curious, Lauren shrugged. "You arrive alone." Then at the most theatrical moment of the night, Sebastian Reed walks in like a movie climax. "Bit too perfect, isn't it?" Sebastian kept his pleasant expression, but the hand resting at Aria's back stiffened slightly. "We've just kept things private," Aria replied, voice soft but firm. "Really," Lauren tilted her head. "Because I happened to ask the concierge earlier. He said Mr. Reed asked where the Greenmore wedding was being held. As if he had no idea who was getting married." Aria froze. Sebastian let out a slow breath. "I overheard your sister's comment when she entered. It was unkind. I stepped in not because Aria asked me to, but because I wanted to." "So you're the chivalrous stranger," Lauren raised a brow. "Saw a damsel being mocked and thought you'd jump in for a little pretend romance. Sounds more like pity than passion." Each word was a pin, precise and cruel. Around them, conversation slowed. Eyes turned their way, not admiring, but suspicious. Aria rose slowly, slipping out from under Sebastian's arm. She looked at him, and in that moment she realized what hurt the most. She had wanted to believe it was real. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice catching. "But the act ends here." "Aria," he said, his voice tinged with something raw. She shook her head gently. "I just got out of a relationship built on deception. I can't step into a new one real or not based on another lie." And with that, she walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind the chandeliers, the string quartet, and the only man who had made her feel truly seen, only to be reminded how fragile that feeling could be when built on borrowed moments. Morning light streamed through the slats of Aria's blinds, catching dust motes as they floated above the quiet of her Capitol Hill apartment. She sat at the kitchen counter, cradling a mug of coffee. Her eyes unfocused, her mind looping through the previous night like a movie reel she couldn't shut off. She'd barely slept. Every moment haunted her, from the instant Sebastian walked into the ballroom to the second she turned her back on him and walked away. What had shaken her more, the public unraveling of a lie, or the private possibility that part of it might have been real? Her phone buzzed on the countertop. "Unknown number." "Aria, it's Sebastian. I'm sorry for last night, for leaving abruptly, for how it ended. I heard what your sister said and I couldn't ignore it. If you're willing, I'd like to explain. Properly." She stared at the message. Part of her wanted to delete it and pretend none of it had ever happened. But another part, the fragile, flickering part deep in her chest, whispered, what if he wasn't pretending? What if the look in his eyes was real? The doorbell rang. She opened the door to find Chloe, her college best friend, holding a pink bakery box and wearing an expectant look. "Emergency debrief breakfast," Chloe said without missing a beat. "Chocolate croissants and those almond things you like. Start talking." So Aria did. She told her everything, from being pushed into the bouquet toss to Sebastian's movie-like entrance. The fake kiss. The whispered lines. The way his gaze made her forget it was all an act. Chloe listened quietly, sipping coffee, then set her cup down. "You know, she said Sebastian Reed is a real billionaire. But the way he walked in and handled that room, it didn't feel like a stunt. He could have turned around the second things got messy, but he didn't. And when it all unraveled, he still told the truth." "Are you sure you're not punishing the wrong man? Just because the last one broke you." The words lingered in the air. Aria looked down, heart tightening. Chloe had a point. With Adam, she'd bent herself into knots to make things work. Ignored her instincts. Overlooked warning signs. forgave and forgave and forgave again. But with Sebastian, the moment something felt off, even slightly, she'd shut the door. Not because he'd done anything truly wrong, but because she'd been trained by heartbreak to run first. Her fear hadn't just built walls, it had built traps. Now, for the first time, she wondered, was I protecting myself? Or preventing myself from healing? 2 days after the wedding, Aria sat across from Lauren at a small cafe on Pine Street, where the sunlight filtered through the windows in golden squares across the wooden table. She had texted Lauren first an invitation not to argue, but to end something. Or maybe to begin again. Neither spoke for the first few minutes. Lauren stirred her iced tea, avoiding eye contact. Aria held her coffee cup with both hands, the warmth grounding her. What happened at the wedding? Aria finally said really hurt me. Not just the Sebastian part, but how you treated me. The looks, the tone, like I was a joke. Lauren sighed. You think I don't know that? Aria blinked. She had never seen her sister look so small. I always thought you were the golden child, Aria continued. Everything came easy to you, Mom and Dad's favorite, the perfect one. But now I'm starting to wonder, was any of that real? Lauren looked up. Her eyes were rimmed red. I've been jealous of you for years, Aria, she said quietly. You built something. You have this life that's yours. People respect you for your mind, not your husband's last name. Aria stared at her, stunned. The assumption she had carried since childhood cracked under the weight of that sentence. I married Derek because Dad said he was stable, because Mom liked the way he held the door for her, but I've never really been myself. My name is attached to a man, to a country club, to dinner parties, but never to who I actually am. Aria hesitated. You and Derek are barely holding on, Lauren admitted. He's been cheating. I've known for a while, and I'm still pretending, still performing for their sake. You walked into that wedding alone, and you were still more real than I've been in years. A silence settled between them, not awkward, but necessary, like fresh air after a storm. I'm sorry, Lauren said hoarsely, for what I said, for calling you out, for not being there when I should have been. I'm sorry too, Aria replied, for always seeing you as my competition instead of someone also trying to survive under the weight of other people's expectations. They sat for a while longer, saying nothing. For the first time, neither sister was performing. Just two women, exhausted, honest, and finally unmasked. That afternoon, Aria drove the familiar tree-lined road toward the house where she had grown up, the white colonial with the neatly trimmed lawn and the American flag fluttering from the porch. She parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, her hands resting on the steering wheel, her heart steady but resolute. This wasn't a casual visit. This wasn't about Sunday dinner or pleasantries. This time she came to speak. When Janet opened the front door, her expression flickered with surprise. Aria, you didn't call? Is everything okay? I need to talk. To both of you. It's important, Aria said, meeting her mother's eyes. Douglas, her father, looked up from the paper in the living room as she stepped inside. He folded it, raising an eyebrow. Is something wrong? Aria sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped neatly in her lap. The room suddenly felt heavier, quieter. I just need you both to listen, she said. No interruptions, no justifications. Just listen. Both parents nodded silently. Aria drew in a breath. All my life I've felt like I had to earn your attention, that if I worked hard enough, succeeded enough, became independent enough, maybe then I'd be seen. But I never really felt that recognition from either of you. Janet frowned. We've always been proud of you, Aria. Not the way you're proud of Lauren, she said. Not in anger, just truth. She gets celebrated for marriage, for doing what you expected. I took a different path, and it's been labeled unsettled, too independent, or still alone. Why is independence treated like a deficiency? Douglas sat up straighter. I just wanted your life to be easier, to have someone by your side, to feel protected. I don't need someone to protect me, Aria said. I need to be respected, especially by my own parents. The silence that followed was thick. I know I'm not always easy, she continued, her voice softer, but that doesn't mean I'm less valuable than Lauren. We're different. And I'm tired of feeling like I have to reshape myself into a version that's more palatable to you. Janet was quiet for a moment before whispering, I just worry that you're lonely. Being alone is less painful than being someone I'm not, Aria replied gently. Douglas looked from his wife to his daughter. His voice was calm but careful, like each word carried weight. You're right, he said. I pushed Lauren toward a life I thought was safe, and I questioned yours because I didn't understand it. But you've built something real, something yours, and I admire that. Janet didn't speak for a long time, but when she reached over and took Aria's hand, her eyes were glassy. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel like you weren't enough, she whispered. You always were. I just didn't know how to show it. And for the first time in years, Aria didn't feel like a stranger in the house she once called home. 3 weeks had passed since Lauren's wedding. 3 weeks of no calls, no texts, no carefully worded follow-ups from Sebastian. Aria assumed it was over the moment she walked out of that ballroom, and maybe a part of her believed that was easier, no loose ends, no new wounds. But tonight when she returned to her apartment from the office, there was a small package waiting on her doorstep. No label, no note. Just a plain square box wrapped in craft paper. She opened it. Inside was a large print of a candid photo from the wedding her and Sebastian caught mid-smile eyes, locked in a gaze that was both playful and disarmingly sincere. On the back of the photo, one handwritten line, pretending has never been this easy. But honestly, I never wanted it to end. She froze. Then a knock at the door. She opened it. Sebastian stood there, not in a tailored suit, not with polished charm, but in a simple jacket and jeans, his expression nervous but honest. I didn't want to pressure you, he said first, but I also couldn't pretend it meant nothing. Aria leaned against the doorway looking at him for a long moment. So why are you here? I'm here to ask for a real chance. No acting, no pretending to be the perfect boyfriend. Just me and a sincere offer. Would you have coffee with me tomorrow night? She let out a small dry laugh, more like an exhale than amusement. Just coffee. First date coffee, second maybe cookies, and third, whatever you want, as long as it's real. She met his eyes, and for a brief second she remembered what it felt like to be seen, not because someone was trying to impress her, but because he always looked at her that way. Okay, she said softly, but this time don't save me. Just walk beside me. He smiled, relieved, real. As long as you'll let me, I'll walk with you anywhere. 6 months later, on a bright Sunday morning, Aria sat on a wooden bench at a park near Lake Union, holding a warm latte, watching a group of kids play tag around the fountain. Beside her, Sebastian finished a quick phone call and turned back to her smiling like she was the only person in the world. Sorry about that, he said. One of the new hires in San Francisco just messed up the product launch timeline. That's the first time in 6 months you've looked at your phone during a date, Aria teased. You're starting to act like a real human. Real human. Real feelings, he replied, tilting his head. What else could I need? She laughed and leaned into his shoulder, not because she was tired, but because now she allowed herself to need someone. And that no longer felt like weakness. Aria's life had changed. Not in some dramatic explosion, but in quiet, steady layers. She still lived in her cozy little apartment, but the living room now had an extra bookshelf, a gift from Sebastian. She still worked her demanding job, but on weekends she sometimes had dinner at Lauren's, no longer a silent rivalry, but honest conversations over wine. Her parents had changed too. Douglas listened more. Janet asked fewer loaded questions. They had started asking about little things, what book she was reading, or whether the pie she baked last Sunday turned out okay. And most surprisingly, Lauren, a month ago she had sent a simple message: Derek moved out. And you were right. Living honestly, even alone, feels lighter. For the first time, Aria didn't feel like the outcast in her family. She felt like the one who had lit a match in the dark. When Sebastian invited her to visit his mother in Vermont, Aria hesitated. But then she said yes. And that weekend she was welcomed with hot soup, a hand-knit blanket, and a woman who had lost a husband young, but still believed in love again, just like Aria. Aria, Sebastian whispered, fingers intertwining with hers. It feels like we're rewriting a story. This time by hand. For real. She didn't answer right away, but she knew he was right. Family wasn't always where you came from. It was where you no longer had to pretend.